Cleopatra VII, the last active ruler of Ptolemaic Egypt, one of history's most intriguing figures. Born in 69 BC, she ascended to the throne at the age of 18 and quickly became known not just for her political skill, but also for her alliances with Rome's most powerful leaders, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Her political entanglements and subsequent romances with these men were strategic, aimed at securing her throne and the independence of Egypt amidst the chaos of a rapidly changing world. Hello and welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, it's good to meet you, and if you're coming back, it's great to have you back with me. As always, if you'd like to support the channel and like what I do, there's a Patreon link in the description. Otherwise, help me out reaching my 10,000 subscriber goal. Perhaps by the time you see this video, I will have already met it. But a like, comment and subscribe certainly goes a lot further than you would imagine. Now, with that being said, I'd like you to relax, and we are going to begin our biography of Cleopatra. Cleopatra VII was born in 69 BC into the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled Egypt, her father being Ptolemy the XII, and her mother believed to be Cleopatra V Tryphena, who was possibly the same person as Cleopatra VI. This lineage made her a direct descendant of Alexander the Great's general, Ptolemy I Soter, the founder of the Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt. Cleopatra's upbringing was marked by an education that likely included stints at Alexandria's famous museum and library, under the tutelage of her mentor Philostratus, from which she learned oration and philosophy, getting a well-rounded education from a young age. But not everything was fun and games. As tensions between Roman and Ptolemaic interests grew, the Roman designs on Egypt became increasingly evident. Senators like Crassus argued for the full annexation of Egypt into the Roman Republic, although initial legislative attempts to do so were rebuffed. In response, Ptolemy XII tried to secure his position through diplomacy and bribery, forging key alliances with Roman leaders, including Pompey, and later Julius Caesar. Despite these efforts, the heavy financial toll of these bribes, coupled with his extravagant lifestyle, led to significant debt with Roman financiers and eroded his standing both at home and abroad. The situation deteriorated further when the Romans annexed Cyprus in 58 BC, a move that led Ptolemy XII's brother, the ruler of Cyprus, to take his own life. The annexation and the manner of his brother's death tarnished Ptolemy XII's reputation, resulting in his eventual exile for allowing such a thing to happen on his watch. During his absence, his daughter, Berenice IV, seized the throne. Ptolemy XII lived in exile in Rome, and then in the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, every day plotting his return. With the support of the Roman military and financial backers, Ptolemy XII orchestrated an invasion of Egypt in 55 BC, led by the Roman governor of Syria, Aulus Gabinius. This campaign, which also saw a young Mark Antony distinguishing himself, ultimately succeeded in restoring Ptolemy XII to the Egyptian throne. During this tumultuous period, Cleopatra, then around 14 years old, is said to have accompanied the Roman expedition back to Egypt, beginning her direct exposure to Roman military and political maneuvers. The later years of Ptolemy's rule were marked by increasing Roman influence in Egypt. He appointed Roman financier Gaius Rabirius Postumus as his chief financial officer, allowed the Roman garrison in Alexandria to dominate the city's affair, and had his own daughter, Berenice IV, executed upon his return to consolidate his power. His death in 51 BC left Egypt in the hands of his children, Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII, as designated in his will, which complicated the succession due to their young ages and the significant Roman debts that he had left behind. Cleopatra's co-regency with Ptolemy XIII began under these challenging circumstances, with both sibling rivalry and the heavy burden of debt shaping the early years of the rule. As co-regent, Cleopatra was made official through inscriptions such as the one found in the Temple of Hathor in Dendera, marking the formal beginning of her ascent to becoming one of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. Thus, she ascended to the Egyptian throne in 51 BC, straddled with this financial debt of 17.5 million drachmas owed to Rome, and it didn't help that Egypt was suffering a severe famine at the time. In her early reign, she dealt with the unruly Gabiniani, former Roman soldiers left to garrison Egypt. Their lawlessness peaked when they brutally murdered the sons of the Syrian proconsul Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, who had been sent to negotiate with them. Cleopatra, seeking to maintain diplomatic relations, extradited the murderers back to Bibulus, but he returned them, rebuking Cleopatra for overstepping her authority. Amid these tribulations, Cleopatra began distancing herself from her brother Ptolemy XIII, whom she had initially co-ruled with, albeit begrudgingly. Documents from the late August of 51 BC start to mention Cleopatra as the sole ruler, an indication of her decision to sideline her brother, potentially due to disagreements over how to manage the kingdom's numerous crises. This rivalry culminated in Cleopatra's temporary alliance with another one of her brothers, Ptolemy XIV. But by 50 BC, the following year, Ptolemy XIII, influenced by his advisor Porthenos and supported by the other court officials like Archelaus and Theodotus, also began to assert his dominance. In the chaos of 49 BC, Cleopatra's situation just got worse. She and Ptolemy XIII were approached by Gnaeus Pompeius, the son of Pompey the Great, seeking aid for his father against Julius Caesar in the ongoing Roman Civil War. The siblings jointly supplied Pompey with ships and troops, partially alleviating their debt to Rome, but it wasn't like they had much of a choice. However, the internal conflict only escalated, and Cleopatra was eventually forced to flee Alexandria, making her way to Thebes. It was from there that Cleopatra ventured to Roman Syria in the early days of 48 BC to assemble a military force to reclaim her throne. Blocked by Ptolemy XIII's forces upon her return, she set up camp near Pelusium. Meanwhile, the civil war in Rome had reached a critical point with the Battle of Pharsalus in the August of 48 BC, where Caesar decisively defeated Pompey. Pompey then fled to Egypt, expecting sanctuary and a warm welcome based on his past support to the Ptolemies. However, under the counsel of Theodotus, Ptolemy XIII's regime decided against hosting Pompey, fearing that his presence might embroil Egypt in Rome's conflicts. Upon his arrival, Pompey was murdered, a grisly gift that was intended to curry favor with Caesar, and certainly not the warm welcome that Pompey was hoping for. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria shortly after, he was presented with Pompey's head as a gift. However, this did not impress him very much, somewhat offensive to Roman sensibilities, and he reacted with disgust rather than gratitude. I told you we should have just went for the box of chocolates. Well, seeking a resolution to the Egyptian dynastic struggles, he summoned both Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra to disband their armies and reconcile. The intervention by Caesar marked a pivotal turn in Cleopatra's fortunes, intertwining her fate more closely with Rome and its leaders. Ptolemy defiantly arrived in Alexandria with his army, blatantly ignoring Caesar's directive to disband his forces before entering the city. Cleopatra, aware of Caesar's fondness for royal women, decided to meet him personally instead of sending emissaries. Now, Cassius Dio, a contemporary historian, suggests that she approached Caesar dressed to impress, captivating him with her intellect and charm. Plutarch offers a more dramatic tale, claiming Cleopatra was smuggled into the palace rolled up in a bed sack, a tactic to bypass her brother's watchful eye. Well, this may have been true, or it perhaps may have been some dramatic license. But what we certainly do know for sure was that she made quite an impression. When Ptolemy XIII learned of his sister's direct engagement with Caesar, he was understandably upset, and he attempted to incite the Alexandrian populace to riot. But Caesar was not having this. He arrested him and quelled the unrest with his oratory. Caesar then convened an assembly in Alexandria, where he presented the will of their late father, Ptolemy XII, which had been in Pompey's possession. The will declared Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII as co-heirs, a move that reinforced Cleopatra's claim to the throne. In an effort to stabilize the region and neutralize potential threats, Caesar proposed that their young siblings, Arsinoe IV and Ptolemy XIV, have the right to govern Cyprus, hoping to appease Egyptian discontent over the islands lost to the Romans. This plan, however, was perceived as favoring Cleopatra over Ptolemy XIII, particularly as the latter commanded a formidable force of 20,000, including the Gabiniani, capable of overpowering Caesar's 4,000 troops. Seizing on the perceived imbalance, Pothianos orchestrated a military response, directing Archelaus to lead their forces against Caesar and Cleopatra. After Cleopatra executed Pothianos, Arsinoe IV seized her opportunity to assert her claim. Thus she aligned with Archelaus, only to betray him by having her new advisor, Ganymedes, assassinate him and take over command. This escalated into a full-scale conflict, and eventually Arsinoe was declared queen. Ganymedes' strategic acumen became evident when he manipulated Caesar into summoning Ptolemy XIII for negotiations, only to have the young king switch allegiance to Arsinoe's side. This maneuver led to Caesar and Cleopatra being besieged within the palace, a siege that stretched into 47 BC. Well, I'm sure they had plenty of ways to kill the time. In the wake of Ptolemy XIII's death, Cleopatra remained the sole monarch of Egypt. During this period, Julius Caesar's reinforcements, including forces led by Mithridates of Pergamum and Antipater of the Idumean, arrived. This bolstered her position significantly. In a subsequent conflict, Ptolemy XIII died while attempting to escape by boat, which capsized in the Nile. Ganymedes, Arsinoe IV's military advisor, was also likely killed in these confrontations, while Theodotus was later captured in Asia by Marcus Junius Brutus and subsequently executed. Arsinoe IV was paraded in Caesar's Roman triumph, but was then exiled to the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. Not a bad place to be exiled to. During these events, Cleopatra was notably absent, staying in the palace, possibly due to her pregnancy with Caesar's child, Caesarion, conceived around September 48 BC. Now, having ended his consul term in 48 BC, Julius Caesar was appointed dictator, which gave him authority to settle the dynastic disputes in Egypt. Oh, and by the way, the term dictator, back in the day, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was basically the Senate had just gone all in on a particular strong man to sort out a particular crisis. It wasn't necessarily meaning that this person was tyrannical. Of course, most of the time they did turn tyrannical, but that's just the way it is, isn't it? Well, Cleopatra and Caesar are said to have embarked on a cruise of the Nile around this time, visiting ancient monuments, kind of like a sightseeing tour of the ancient world. You can imagine it. This journey, detailed by Suetonius, involved a luxurious barge and might reflect more on Roman elite customs rather than historical fact. Nevertheless, it highlights Caesar's interest in geography and the strategic importance of Egypt. Caesar left in April of 47 BC, heading to confront Pharnaces II of Pontus, leaving a significant military presence behind in Egypt to support Cleopatra, just in case. Their son, Caesarion, was born on the 23rd of June, 47 BC. Cleopatra boldly declared him as Caesar's son, a claim that was politically charged given Caesar was already married to Calpurnia, but him and Calpurnia did not have any children. So someone's got to do the heavy lifting. Well, Cleopatra's visit to Rome in late 46 BC was marked by her residing in Caesar's villa. Obviously, Calpurnia was not impressed by this, understandably, and her influential presence in Roman politics, including her involvement in the reformation of the Roman calendar. However, her stay was overshadowed by political intrigue and that little matter of the impending assassination on Caesar. Well, in the politically charged atmosphere following this assassination in 44 BC, Cleopatra made a skillful navigation through her kingdom through very turbulent times. In 43 BC, a year later, as the second triumvirate formed between Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus to stabilize the Roman Republic, Cleopatra faced solicitations from both sides of the ensuing conflict. Gaius Cassius Longinus, one of Caesar's assassins, and Publius Cornelius Dolabella, a Caesarian loyalist and the proconsul of Syria, each sought her military support. Cleopatra chose to align, albeit subtly, with Dolabella, citing internal strife as a reason to decline Cassius, while dispatching the legion Caesar had stationed in Egypt to support Dolabella. But unfortunately for Cleopatra, these troops were intercepted, and they were captured by Cassius in Palestine. Should have taken the sea route. Further complicating her politics, Cleopatra's governor of Cyprus, Serapion, defected over to Cassius's side and provided him with additional ships. In an attempt to remedy her delayed military aid, and perhaps to secure her own position, Cleopatra herself sailed with her fleet to Greece to assist Octavian and Antony. However, bad luck and a severe storm damaged her ships, delaying her arrival and causing her to miss the best bits and decisive actions of the Battle of Philippi, where Antony and Octavian secured a critical victory against the assassins of Caesar, Cassius and Brutus, who, after the battle, were quite upset and decided the best thing to do was to take the self-checkout line. Well, by the end of 42 BC, the triumvirs had partitioned the Republic among themselves, with Octavian controlling the west, Antony the east, and Lepidus being marginalized. In the summer of 41 BC, the following year, Antony, stationed in Tarsus, summoned Cleopatra to clarify her political position regarding her alleged support for Cassius. Initially a little hesitant, Cleopatra was eventually persuaded by Antony's envoy, Quintus Dellius, to set out and meet with Antony in person. This meeting was crucial, not only to rectify her stance in the Roman civil conflict, but it also offered an opportunity for Antony to forge a personal alliance with the charismatic queen. Thus Cleopatra arrived at Tarsus aboard her magnificent royal barge, the Thalamagos, and hosted Antony with opulent banquets that showcase her wealth and royal stature. During these meetings, she effectively cleared her name of any wrongdoing in the civil war, charming Antony and convincing of her loyalty to Caesar's cause by explaining her intended support for Dolabella. Additionally, she negotiated political favors, including the elimination of her threats. Her rebellious sister Arsinoe was executed in Ephesus. Better luck next time. And her disloyal governor of Cyprus was also handed over for execution, consolidating her power and securing her position as a crucial ally to Antony. When Antony arrived in Alexandria in the November of 41 BC, he received a warm welcome, a stark contrast to the Roman occupation forces previously led by Caesar. This positive reception was due partly to his role in restoring Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, to the throne earlier in his career. And during his stay, Antony indulged in the luxurious lifestyle that Cleopatra offered, reminiscent of the opulence he experienced on her ship at Tarsus. Cleopatra, sensing an opportunity in Antony's powerful position as triumvir, chose him as a partner to father her future heirs, aligning herself closely with Rome's dominant figure, at least post-Caesar. Antony's authority allowed him the discretion to restore territories that were historically under Ptolemaic control, but had been annexed by Rome. By the winter of 41 to 40 BC, regions like Cilicia and Cyprus were confirmed under Cleopatra's governance, though they likely were granted to her during her intimate time with Antony. However, Antony's stay in Egypt was cut short by military necessities back in Syria, where his forces faced threats from the Parthian-aligned Quintus Labienus. In response, Cleopatra supported Antony's campaign efforts by providing him with 200 ships, in part as payment for the territories that she'd regained. Antony acknowledged the birth of their twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene II, in 40 BC, symbolically named to herald a new age, and perhaps Cleopatra's hopes for Antony to emulate Alexander the Great by conquering Parthia. Antony's military plans, however, were soon disrupted by the Perusine War, initiated by his wife Fulvia, who was still back in Rome. She had opposed Octavian in hopes of securing her husband's dominance over the Roman state. The conflict, though partly aiming to detach Antony from Cleopatra, emerged before their meeting at Tarsus, and culminated in Fulvia's death, and Antony's consequent political necessity to reconcile with Octavian. This reconciliation, formalized in the Treaty of Brundisium, affirmed Antony's domination over the East, but required him to relinquish key western territories, and even marry Octavian's sister, Octavia, which complicated his relationship with Cleopatra, obviously. In late 40 BC, Cleopatra had an unexpected visitor, a one named Herod, who fled from Judea amidst political upheaval. installed as tetrarch by Antony and later proclaimed king by Rome. Herod's alignment with the Roman leaders presented a strategic challenge to Cleopatra. Despite the personal and political entanglements that arose after Antony married Octavia, his relationship with Cleopatra remained as robust as ever, evidenced by his decisions that significantly favored her. As Antony moved his headquarters to Athens and embraced life with Octavia, producing 2 daughters, his political ties with Cleopatra continued to deepen. During this period, Herod, Cleopatra's regional rival, was embroiled in his own civil war, unable to draw support from Cleopatra or the heavily engaged Roman forces. By the end of their triumvirate term, in early 37 BC, Octavia facilitated a crucial meeting at Tarentum, resulting in the triumvirate's renewal until 33. This meeting also led to Octavia arranging military support for Antony's upcoming campaigns, emphasizing her role as a supportive political spouse. Antony then summoned Cleopatra to Antioch to solidify plans for the east and gather resources for his intended Parthian conquest. And it was here that Antony officially met his twin children with Cleopatra, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, bestowing upon them symbolic surnames that reflected his and Cleopatra's imperial aspirations. In Antioch, Antony made substantial territorial grants to Cleopatra that encompassed much of the Levant and other regions. This expansion not only restored historical Ptolemaic territories, but also expanded her influence into new areas, such as parts of the Nabatean Kingdom and Roman Crete. These strategic moves were aimed at stabilizing Antony's eastern territories through client rulers that were loyal to him, enhancing Cleopatra's queenly stature quite significantly. However, Antony's generous allocations to Cleopatra sparked considerable discontent in Rome. Octavian manipulated this sentiment to portray Antony as a traitor to Roman interests, emphasizing his abandonment of Octavia for the foreign queen Cleopatra. Kind of a metaphor, you know. Well, this narrative undermined Antony's position in Rome, while Octavian elevated his status and that of his wife Livia by granting them unprecedented honors, creating an image of moral and civic virtue in stark contrast to Antony's conduct. It didn't help all of the rumors and things they were saying about Cleopatra either. Well, in 36 BC, as Antony embarked on his ill-fated Parthian campaign, Cleopatra was by his side until her pregnancy necessitated her return to Egypt. Later that year, she bore Antony another son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. The campaign itself, well, it did not go well, notably due to the defection of key allies such as Artavasdes II of Armenia to the side of the Parthians, culminating in severe losses for Antony's forces. The aftermath saw a defeated and demoralized Antony retreating back to the safety of Egypt, where Cleopatra provided critical support for his now devastated army. This retreat marked a significant shift in Antony's fortunes, as he chose to remain in Alexandria with Cleopatra rather than risk political and potential lethal challenges in Rome. He wasn't stupid. He was not going back there. Well, after Antony's triumphant display in Alexandria in 34 BC, where he paraded Armenian royalty as captives, and Cleopatra was proclaimed the Queen of Kings, the political theater only continued. Cleopatra and Antony's actions, especially the donations of Alexandria, where vast territories were declared under the dominion of Cleopatra and her children, significantly agitated the Roman elite. This event, staged in the Gymnasium of Alexandria, saw Cleopatra and her children dressed in royal attire, with territory like Armenia, Media, Parthia, Syria, and many more assigned to them, further emboldening their royal stature. Antony's request to the Roman Senate to ratify these territorial grants was met with widespread resistance, especially from Octavian himself, who seized on the public disclosure of the donations of Alexandria to escalate his propaganda campaign against Antony and Cleopatra. It was this propaganda that framed Cleopatra as a kind of foreign seductress who had ensnared Antony, turning him against ancient Rome. Such narratives compared her to mythical figures like Helen of Troy, suggesting that her influence could lead to the downfall of entire Roman civilization. This period was also marked by intense mutual accusations between Octavian and Antony alike. Antony accused Octavian of power grabs, such as illegally deposing Lepidus, while Octavian charged Antony with various transgressions, including his unrecognized marriage to Cleopatra, while he was still married to Octavia, and also the recognizing of Caesarion as Julius Caesar's true heir over Octavian. Well, within these heated exchanges, Cleopatra was often portrayed in Roman political rhetoric and later literary accounts as wielding excessive power over Antony, using charms and even sorcery, much like legendary figures of classical literature. This narrative was enriched by anecdotes like Cleopatra's supposed bet, where she dissolved a pearl in vinegar, showcasing her extravagant and persuasive nature. All of this came together to really paint Cleopatra as a bit of a boogeyman, or boogie woman, if they have boogie woman. Well, in the background of this, Cleopatra's administrative actions continued on, such as granting tax exemptions in Egypt, which are documented extensively in papyrus texts, indicating her active role in managing the affairs of her realm, even as she navigated the complexities of Rome. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC marked a decisive turning point in Roman and Egyptian history, serving as the culmination of the escalating tensions between Octavian and the alliance of Antony and Cleopatra. The battle took place near the entrance of the Ambracian Gulf in Greece and was chiefly a naval encounter. Octavian, under the skilled military leadership of his close ally, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, prepared meticulously for the confrontation. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet was substantial in size, but lacked the training and discipline that Octavian's forces rather had. Despite the numerical superiority, the quality and strategic positioning of Octavian's navy gave him a distinct advantage. As the battle unfolded, Cleopatra's role became controversial and critical. Positioned at the rear with 60 ships, her location in the battle formation suggests that she was kept at a distance from the central combat by Antony's commanders, perhaps due to their skepticism about her military involvement. This decision may have been influenced by the need to protect the queen and ensure a route of escape, considering Egypt's safety was her paramount concern. The battle escalated, with Antony's ships bearing sails, an unusual tactic that implied a potential need for a swift retreat. As the conflict reached its climax, Cleopatra took the initiative to break through the blockade, using very sails that were intended for flexibility in battle maneuvers. Her departure from the battlefield, followed by Antony, has been interpreted by some historians as a strategic retreat, intended to preserve their lives and what little remained of the fleet. However, this act was construed by their Roman adversaries and later historians as a desertion of the troops at the most critical moment, casting Cleopatra in a very negative light as having abandoned the fight out of pure self-preservation. Antony's decision to follow Cleopatra left his forces leaderless and hastened the disintegration of their naval power. In the immediate aftermath of Cleopatra and Antony's withdrawal, the morale of their forces naturally plummeted, leading to widespread defections to Octavian's side. Allied kings and military leaders, seeing the tide turn, also abandoned Antony, further isolating him and Cleopatra as they made their sad journey back to Egypt. Thus, the defeat at Actium, it wasn't just a military loss, but it was also a significant psychological blow to Antony and Cleopatra's alliance, effectively ending their challenge to Octavian's authority. This event paved the way for Octavian to consolidate his power, leading to the transformation of the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire, and marked the end of the Hellenistic period as Cleopatra's reign concluded and Antony met his own demise. The narrative of the battle and its aftermath had been shaped significantly by Octavian's personally directed propaganda, highlighting the loyalty shifts and framing Cleopatra's influence as pernicious. The battle's portrayal often reflects the political motivations of contemporary and subsequent Roman historians, whose accounts were colored by the victor's perspective, emphasizing Cleopatra's alleged betrayal and Antony's supposed infatuation that led to his downfall. Thus we find ourselves in the turbulent aftermath of the Battle of Actium, where Cleopatra and Antony were in this dire situation, grappling with the rapid disintegration of their power and influence. After landing in Parathonion, Egypt, the couple went their separate ways, each to undertake their own desperate measures to salvage their crumbling regime. Antony headed to Cyrene to rally additional forces, while Cleopatra returned to Alexandria. In a bid to control the narrative and prevent panic, Cleopatra sought to portray the devastating defeat in Greece as a victory instead. Her fear of a potential uprising if the truth were known drove her to such deceptive tactics. The situation worsened for Antony when Lucius Pinarius, the governor of Cyrene, appointed by Antony himself, switched his allegiance to Octavian's side. Pinarius executed Antony's messengers and handed over the 4 legions under his command to Octavian, delivering a severe blow to Antony's already faltering campaign. It was the news of this betrayal, added to everything else, that pushed Antony to the very brink of despair, leading him to almost take the self-checkout line. But he was thankfully dissuaded by his most loyal officers. Retreating into isolation, Antony constructed a small reclusive cottage on the island of Pharos, which he named the Timoneon, symbolizing his retreat from public life, akin to the cynical philosopher Timon of Athens. Basically, Antony was just sick and tired, and he wanted to live out in the countryside somewhere where everybody would just leave him alone. You can't blame him. Meanwhile, Herod, previously a supporter, advised Antony to sever ties with Cleopatra, and then demonstrated his loyalty to Octavian, ensuring his political survival, and further isolating Antony and Cleopatra. As their situation became increasingly precarious, Cleopatra began to see Antony as more of a liability than an asset. By late summer of 31 BC, she herself considered a bold escape plan, and also for her son Caesarion. She intended to abdicate in favor of her son and flee with her fleet to the Red Sea, potentially aiming for a distant refuge in India. However, her plans were thwarted when Malichus I, instigated by Octavian's governor of Syria, burned her ships. Thus, she found herself trapped in Egypt with nowhere to go. With her options dwindling and her situation desperate, Cleopatra reportedly began to experiment with poisons, testing their effects on prisoners and possibly her servants, though it is suggested that this was just later made up as propaganda. This macabre testing was likely a means to prepare her for the inevitable confrontation with Octavian, exploring all possibilities for control over her fate in the face of a capture that seemed pretty much set in stone at this point. Well, the turbulent final days of Cleopatra's reign, her attempts to secure her son Caesarion's future and preserve her own dignity, were met with relentless pressures from the advancing forces of Octavian. As Octavian prepared for a decisive invasion of Egypt in the spring of 30 BC, Cleopatra made a desperate bid to secure a favorable outcome. She had Caesarion enter the ranks of the Ephebi, a public sign she was grooming him to be the sole ruler of Egypt. In a parallel move, Antony had his son with Fulvia undertake the same rite, signaling their continued alliance. Cleopatra aimed to negotiate with Octavian, sending emissaries to present lavish gifts, and proposed that her children inherit Egypt while Antony could live out his days in exile. Octavian's response? Well, it was dismissive at best, engaging only with Cleopatra's propositions and not Antony's. As negotiations stalled, Cleopatra's situation became increasingly desperate, leading her to contemplate drastic measures to ensure her survival. Ultimately, Cleopatra's end came swiftly. As Octavian's forces closed in, she secluded herself in her tomb with her closest attendants, misleading Antony with the news of her death. She prompted him to take his own life. Cleopatra then followed, reportedly using a sharp implement to induce poison, though legends romanticize the account as her death by an asp bite. Octavian, upon securing Alexandria, was pragmatic in his consolidation of power. He allowed Cleopatra and Antony to be buried together, signifying a respectful end to their tumultuous reign. However, he had no intention of allowing Caesarion to succeed Cleopatra. Despite false promises of kingship, Caesarion was executed shortly after his mother's death, ensuring that no Ptolemaic claimant could challenge Roman rule. Octavian's further strategic elimination of his rivals and his control over Egypt marked the end of the Hellenistic period and the rise of the Roman Empire under his reign as Augustus. This era was categorized by establishment of the Roman province of Egypt and marked a significant transformation in the ancient world's balance of power, firmly centering it under Roman dominion. Well, I suppose the very next morning, the sun rose over the mountains just as it does every other day, and life goes on. The wheel of time keeps turning. Empires rise and fall, and another page in history has come to an end as we turn to the next one. Well, with that, we find ourselves at the end of the video. Did you enjoy it? I hope you did. I would like to thank my top-tier patrons, Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, and Susan. Thank you very much for supporting the channel, and thank you for listening so far. I wish you all the best. I hope you've learned something, and I hope you're relaxed. Good night. See you tomorrow. Same time, same place, right here on YouTube. Goodbye for now.